Please turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. We'll begin in verse 19. We'll finish chapter 9 this morning. Thank you for joining me in this study. And as always, I hope everybody's doing well. Hope you're staying healthy. Hope you and your family are doing well. So we come to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning in verse 19. And Paul continues the talk about his right as an evangelist and how he has laid that right aside, restrained himself in the exercise of that right, that he might not be a burden to the Corinthians in preaching the gospel. Though he does take wages of other churches, robbing them, to have taken the wages of the Corinthians would have diminished him in the eyes of the Corinthians. And so he lays that aside. Now he comes to verses 19 through 23, and he further thinks about these rights and teaches us about these rights. So he will say in verse 19, "For I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more." Then drop down to verse 23. "Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partaker of it with you." So what Paul's fixing to say between those two sentences is how he does this. Paul is not a slave to any. But when he says to the Jew, he became a Jew, to the uncircumcised, he became uncircumcised, to those with the law, as with the law, those without the law, as without the law, he's simply saying he adapted himself to men. He's not saying he was without law. The contrast is with the law, codified law, without a codified law. Paul's not saying he's acting outside of law here. Paul's simply saying that when he acted, when he served, he adapted himself to men. He adapted himself to those who he was teaching, those whom he was teaching. And whatever he had to do to adapt, if it was to Jew nationality, like, for example, he'll keep the vow and go in Acts chapter 27 and keep the vow, because as he's still nationally a Jew, and he's doing the things that were customs of the Jews. So when he was around the Jews, he did the things that were customs of the Jews. He's not saying he bowed down to the law of Moses again and bowed down to keeping the law of Moses again. He's simply saying he adapted himself to whatever was necessary to make himself accommodated to preach the gospel. Actually, that's very good advice. Often when I'm teaching someone, I'll try to learn something about their background. I'll try to learn something about what they like, what they dislike. And then when I'm teaching, I'll try to use language. I'll try to use words that they can identify with based on what we're talking about. I don't try to use my words. I try to find things that can identify with them. And that's what Paul is really doing here. He's trying to use every opportunity he can to try to save others and be a servant of others. And so that's what he's saying here in these few verses here. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I became all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Paul didn't mean he became weak. Paul's not condescending to them here. He's not acting without regard to them. He's simply saying, I tried to be humble with them. I tried to humble myself before them, and I tried to put myself in their shoes, and I tried to think of where they were, and I tried to think of where they were coming from. That is tremendously good advice in trying to teach somebody. That is good advice about living life with people. That's good advice about how to get along with people. That's good advice about how to be a benefit to people. And so then we come to verse 24 through 27. And the point that Paul is making here still is self-control. Self-control. And he's going to pull something from the Isthmian Games that would be parallel of a kind to our Olympic Games. And so he's going to look at a fighter and a runner. And here's the man that gets in the ring to fight. And Paul's saying, I don't get in the ring to shadow box. If I'm going to get in the ring to fight, I'm going to get in the ring to fight to win. If I'm going to run, I'm not just going to kind of jog along. I'm not going to go about this in a lackadaisical way with no urgency whatsoever. I am going to be urgent about it. If I'm going to run to win. I'm not going to enter this race to lose. And Paul's talking about a crown. When the fighter or the runner would win a crown, the crown they would win would just simply be a group of fig leaves sewn together that in time would dry and would would fall apart. Today we talk about going for the gold. But Paul is talking about here not simply the wreath or the gold medal. He's talking about that when he competes to win, and you and I can compete to win. He said there's not just one crown, but there's a crown available for every one of us. And that crown, that prize ought to be important to us. So important that when we enter the race, so important that when we enter the ring, we don't enter to lose, we enter to win. We're not just kind of taking our time, loitering as we're going along here, just hanging around, folding our arms, being indifferent to this. He said there is an urgency to this. In fact, he'll use the word in verse 25, everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain an imperishable, we an imperishable. Everyone who strives, that idea competes is strives, contends. That's a muscular word. It's taken from the wrestling arena, in which you have a man put in the most extreme position, and you strive. You're working as hard as you can to try to overcome your opponent. Here are the athletes that train themselves to train the body to respond to the mind, not the mind to respond to the body. They deprive themselves. They have a strict regimen. They devote themselves to everything that they might win in the contest of which they are a part. And so they don't enter the ring to lose. Paul's point about this in verse 26 and 27, therefore I run thus not with uncertainty, therefore I fight not as one who be there, but I discipline my body. There's that self-control. And bring it into subjection, lest when I preach to others, I myself should become disqualified. Paul said, I am in this to fight, I'm in this to win. And then he talks about this idea of subjection, bringing it under subjection. Maybe your old translations say buffet. The idea there is, I bludgeon the eye. And what happened is, in those times of competition, you would have the boxers that would get in the ring, but they would have their hand molded some wet substance like rawhide or leather or something that would be wet, and then that would be they would grind in sharp objects, and then when it would dry, it would fit the hand. Those sharp objects would be embedded into whatever that they were embedded, that rawhide or leather or whatever it was, and they'd go in the ring, and with those sharp objects, they would try to debilitate their opponent. In fact, even in boxing matches today, UFC matches you watch, you'll have the boxer who has in his corner someone that will tape his eye or will put some kind of a gook on it to keep it from bleeding. Or they'll cut their eye when the eye gets too swollen and sort of bleeds so they can open their eye, because if the eye is closed, they can't see their opponent. And Paul said, I bludgeon my eye, because as a herald, as one shouting the good news, as one crying forth the gospel, as one entering the game, as a combatant, as a participant, I don't want to be one who is cast away. I don't want to be the one who comes before the judge and determine if I obey the rules or not, the rules of combat or the rules of competition. I don't want to be found as one underhanded. I don't want the crown stripped from me. I don't want to be cast away. I don't want to be considered unworthy of what the prize is. So I don't want to be disqualified. That's what he's saying here. So here is the herald who would summon the contestants. The contestants would come into the ring or to the arena, and they would compete. And Paul said, I'm calling people to God. And when I do that, I bruise or beat the body. I lay it aside. I lay it flat out. I put it in its right place. Complete slavery, lest it deprive me of presenting the gospel without charge, without any accusation against me. So Paul is saying here in 1 Corinthians 9, he has the right to be supported as an evangelist. He laid that right aside. And his glory, that which he boasts, was freely giving that which had been given to him. He made himself available to all people in any manner that he could. He wasn't concerned about his rights or his appearance with them. And he did everything to exercise self-restraint in the exercise of his rights and his liberty, so he would not be disqualified in preaching the gospel or bring the gospel with a lack of or bring the gospel into ill repute or a lack of proper reputation or proper glory. So that's our study in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Thanks for joining me. We'll pick up in chapter 10 next time. Thank you.